In this episode, we talk about Mel Tucker. We talk about week 3 reactions, who's good, who's not. And then we also will talk about other scandals happening to teams across the league. All coming up right after this. Hello and welcome back to the College Football Fanatics podcast. I am your host, Daniel, as always. And today we're going to be talking about week 3. We'll talk a little bit about the scandal surrounding Mel Tucker and Michigan State. And then we'll also get into talking a little bit about Baylor. I'm still trying to piece together some of the information surrounding that. It doesn't look good. So I want to get into talking about week 3. And I guess there's no better place to start than former and even still to some degree current powerhouse Alabama. I shouldn't even say former. They're still a powerhouse, but they've fallen on some tough times recently. They played USF over the past weekend. The line was, or the over-under was 61 points, and the line was minus 34 for Alabama. And going into this game, you would think that Alabama would be, dominating USF and things like that. And I didn't, and that just didn't happen. I think at halftime it was like 10-7 or 10-3 or something like that. It was really low, and the game ended up only being 17. It only ended up being 17-3. So it wasn't they didn't even cover the line, and it was a bad game for Alabama. And I want to talk about some of the reasons that I thought it looked bad for Alabama. And that was, the first one that I saw was they didn't seem to have the same hunger that they've had in past years to get after the quarterback, to do other, to get after players, to get the ball into the end zone. This was a team that I felt looked defeated before they even stepped onto the field. And you never want your team to be like that. You don't want your team going into a game not feeling up to playing. And I get that you're not going to have your entire team, super enthusiastic to go down to Southern Florida and play down in Tampa. I get that. But on the other hand, you don't want your team looking like Alabama did this past weekend, where nobody looked like they really wanted to be there. The only player that I saw that really looked good was Dallas Turner. He was legitimately the only player. And I didn't like that they benched Milroe for 2 quarterbacks that looked significantly worse. Did Milroe lose against Texas? Yes. But that loss was not his fault. There was a lot of things that had to go on for them to go and lose to Texas. And Jalen Milroe was not the reason that they lost. Okay? The entire team was the reason they lost. There was a lot wrong with the way they played against Texas. And it just really hurt them. I think, you didn't have somebody back there that the O-line or the receivers really wanted to get the ball for. I saw they played with a much hungrier game against Texas than they did against USF. So I think sitting Milroe really hurt them. And I think from now on, Saban's going to be like, Milroe's our guy. Because he may not be the best quarterback and he may not make all the throws, but at least the team looks like they can rally behind him instead of Buckner or I can't remember the third guy's name, but instead of the other 2 players, Ty Simpson, instead of, trying to get them to rally behind one of those 2 guys, at least they did rally behind Jalen Milroe at Texas. They still lost the game, of course, but it was a good game and it was very entertaining. So The next thing is that Alabama's, USF's Byron Brown, the quarterback, looked really good on his feet. He went 14 for 28 in the air for 87 yards. So he didn't look that great. He didn't look that great when he was throwing, but he had 92 yards on the ground. Now he did have 24 carries, but he had those 92 yards did help USF stay into the game. So it was a surprisingly close matchup. I also want to bring out this stat where Alabama has a 90% blue chip ratio. Now, blue chip players are 4 and 5 stars, and a blue chip ratio is the amount of 4 and 5 star players coming out of high school that you have on your roster. Now, this does not mean that all these 4 and 5 star players are going to live up to the expectations. This does not mean these 4 and 5 star players are all going to end up being first round picks. It just means that they have the potential coming out of high school to be really, really great football players. And unfortunately, that 90% ratio didn't help much. Now, Alabama is a talented enough team that they can come out and look sluggish and win against a school like FSU or USF. Sorry, not FSU. USF. USF does not have the program or the players to contend with Alabama on a level that would really challenge them most days. But it looked really bad. And USF's and the Alabama O-line made USF's front seven look really good, which is not something you want out of a school that is well known for its football prowess. Coming from a coach, having a head coach that has had a dynasty for the past 10 years or so. Might be a little less than that, but and that starts to beg the question, is Nick Saban's Alabama reign of dominance over the NCAA, is that over? Is it finished? And while I want to say yes, and while I do think they're on a downward trajectory, and I think other schools like USC and Miami and other schools in these general blue collar, blue blood. These general blue blood schools are on the uptick, and Alabama's somewhat on the downtick. I still don't want to say the dynasty's over, that there's no chance in any way that Nick Saban can recover from this. He can. They've had bad seasons previously. They've had 9-3 seasons. They've had 10-2 seasons. For Alabama, that's a bad season. For most other schools, it's a pretty darn good season. That's a season that you don't just scoff at when you see your team having a 10-2 season. Ask me, ask me 8 years ago if what I would do for a 10-2 season for Michigan, and I would say I would do just about anything for a 10-2 season. And even today, while I look at a 10-2 season as a bad season or as a letting down season, 10-2 is still a very good season. So you got to keep that in perspective when you look at these teams that have been good for a while, and they start to fall off a little bit. You got to remember 10-2 is a very respectable season. And I think 10-2 is probably going to be what Alabama's season comes out to be. I think they probably lose to LSU. I think there's an argument that could be made for that. So they don't have a super rigorous schedule for the rest of the season, but there are a few teams that I think Alabama can lose to on their schedule, and we'll get to that probably on Friday. Next up was lack of discipline. Was bad. Alabama had a kick return that was returned for a touchdown, but was called back because of a penalty. And while Alabama is not the most egregious and most penalized teams in college football, penalties don't help ever. They just set you back. So Alabama will have to get more disciplined if they want to, if they really want to succeed. Next up is drop passes. I think I saw like 3 drop passes or something like that. And it's just, your receivers, you have to catch the ball. Like there's nothing more that you can do to frustrate a coach than when you make just silly mistakes, especially when these dropped passes are not passes that are, 5 feet in front of the receiver and they have to dive to try and catch it. If they're like right on you and you drop the pass, come on. So let's go through some of the stats that I kind of wanted to take note of. Tyler Buckner had a really bad game. He went 5 for 14 for 35 yards, no touchdowns. Ty Simpson went not 5 for 9, 73 yards for one rushing touchdown. Roy Dell Williams was the leading running rusher for Alabama. He had 17 carries, 129 yards, and 1 touchdown. And then Jace McClellan, who actually looked pretty good. I will say he showed some decent qualities while he was on the field. He had 13 carries for 74 yards. Nobody got over 50 receiving yards, which is, if you're trying to win football games, is just not the way that you're going to do it. CJ Dupree was the leading receiver with 1 reception for 45 yards. And then Isaiah Bond was 4 receptions for 42 yards. Neither had any touchdowns. The defense had 86 total tackles, 38 solo tackles, 5 sacks, 10 tackles for loss, and 1 interception. Those 5 sacks and 10 tackles for loss, that Alabama D-line was pretty much getting through the USF O-line fairly easily. So there's not too much you could ask from more of that defensive line. Dallas Turner was, in my opinion, the star defensive player and the star player of the game for Alabama. He had 7 tackles, 5 solo, 2.5 sacks, and 2.5 tackles for loss. Byram Brown, the quarterback for USF, had 14 for 28, 87 yards, 1 interception, 23 carries for 92 yards, and 1 fumble. I kind of felt like Byram Brown tried to do too much by himself. And I get that, your team isn't helping you out when the defensive line is getting through on what feels like every play. But he really did. He was rushing. Like, there were times where he would drop back into the pocket. A defender would come in and he would then move up. He would get himself some space to allow him to continue looking downfield. But instead of continuously looking downfield, he would do what a lot of quarterbacks do, and he would just take off. Especially if they're dual threat quarterbacks, he would just take off. Even though he might have a receiver to completely open downfield. And I really didn't like that. I thought that was not that. I thought that he should have been looking downfield a little more for at least a little longer. Next up was Naquan Wright, was the leading rusher. He had 15 carries for 62 yards. Sean Atkins, the leading receiver, he had 6 receptions for 42 yards. And then USF had 75 total tackles. Their defense had 75 total tackles, 23 solo tackles, 5 sacks, and 8 tackles for loss. That 5 sacks and 8 tackles for loss, that's not something you want to see when your O-line is playing against a team that very rarely, if ever, is in the top 25, and a program that I believe the only time they've ever been in the top 5 was the 2007 season, when just mayhem was going on. Yeah, you really don't want to see it. It's just not good for you. And I question whether or not this offensive line is going to be able to really protect much, considering that they did the exact same thing against Texas. Was there was a lot of pressure on Jalen Milroe, because this offensive line wasn't doing much. So it's gonna be a big season for this offensive line, and really the offensive line is the backbone of any football team, because if your offensive line is really weak, there's not going to be much that you can do. So next up, we're going to be talking about the Michigan Bowling Green game. I was rather disappointed with Michigan on this game. I thought that they should have performed a lot better. There's a few things I want to talk about. Michigan had some turnover issues. There were 3 interceptions, and I think 1 fumble. There might have been 1 or 2 fumbles. I know Max Bredesen lost a fumble on a kickoff. I can't remember if there was a second fumble though. But I want to talk about that first interception. JJ threw his first interception of the season. This was it was a very good play by the defensive back. It really was, because the defensive back is covering Max Bredesen. He's covering AJ Barner. And AJ Barner is on, I think it's like a short curl route. And Roman Wilson is supposed to go over the top on, I believe it was a slant. I could be wrong about that, but either way, Wilson was supposed to go over the top. Barner was supposed to curl. And the defensive back recognized the play really well. He really did. He recognized it really well. He peeled off of Barner because he was reading JJ. And when JJ threw it to Wilson, JJ just didn't see this defensive back peeling off of AJ Barner, and the back got the interception. And that was just he could have maybe seen the defensive back. I don't know, but it was a really good defensive play, and I'm not going to take anything away from that Bowling Green defensive back, because that's all you can say is just it was a great defensive play. That's all it was. So, the defensive line for Michigan was really good at pressuring the Bowling Green quarterback. They got 3 sacks and 10 tackles for loss. So they had a lot of good pressure, and they had moments where I'm like, there's just nothing that this quarterback can do besides just running for his life. So they were able to break through quite a bit. There were a few blown coverages by the Michigan secondary. I do believe Will Johnson was back in this game, but I don't think he played much. I believe Makari Page was also still out, or he might have just been back. I can't, there was a lot of injuries on this Michigan secondary. So we'll see if they get healthy again for the rest of the season. They have Rutgers next up. So it's not going to be a huge loss. But I do hope that, for conference play, these guys get back in and they're getting back into the groove of playing. After the first drive, Michigan started to look really, really sloppy. They just had one mistake after another. There was a kickoff where Max Bredesen fumbles the ball, and he's a player who has had the ball in his hands, so he shouldn't be fumbling the ball. It's not like he's a defensive lineman who's not used to having the ball in his hands at all. He has the ball in his hands. So it really is disappointing when you see that. JJ's second interception was a bad throw. He underthrew it to Cornelius Johnson when Roman Wilson was wide open. It kind of felt like he was trying to force Cornelius Johnson some passes. to maybe not make him feel left out or something like that. I don't know, but it really did feel like he was trying to force some things. And then talking about defensive linemen, Chris Jenkins had a great game. He is a big leader on this team, quite obviously. He's a defensive tackle for Michigan, and he intercepted a football, and it was just a great awareness play where he recognized that the defensive line was actually getting into the backfield too quickly on that singular play. And he decided to, instead of go rush the quarterback, he decided to actually drop back, and because he thought it was a screen, and it was a screen. He intercepts the ball and he takes it down to like the Bowling Green 2-yard line. So it was a great awareness play, and all the props to him. It was phenomenal. Let's see. Tyler Morris and JJ McCarthy had a couple of really, really close connections that could have gone. That if they had gone their way, it could have turned the game entirely around for JJ. So I think there were only 3 there were only 3 players who had any receptions at all. So McCarthy, this was by far his worst game. He had 143 yards on 8 completions for 13 attempts, 2 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. Blake Corum, though, had a really great game. If you wanted to know if Blake Corum's back, he is. He's back. He had 12 carries for 101 yards and 2 touchdowns. So Bowling Green's Cam Orth, who was their starting quarterback, went 8 for 11 for 91 yards. But he got injured, I think, some point in the second quarter. And then they had to bring in their backup, Hayden Timasech, I think is how you pronounce his name. He was 6 for 10, 33 yards and 2 interceptions. So there really wasn't much he could do there. The defense had 46 total tackles, 30 solo, 1 sack, and 1 tackle for loss. A solid performance, but not really all that great. Nothing to really, pump up about. So that's going to be it for that Michigan Bowling Green game. Florida, Tennessee. This game was really fun to watch. It was a very enjoyable game because I was watching to see how Tennessee would come into, how they would act coming into Florida. And Florida, to their credit, looked like a completely different team against Tennessee than they did against Utah. So Florida actually won this game. Unranked Florida against number 11 Tennessee won this game 29-16. A significant win over Tennessee. Some positives for Tennessee. The first drive went 71 yards in 2 minutes, which is really fast. They scored a touchdown really quickly. The Tennessee defense had multiple chances to take down Etienne, the running back for Florida, Montrell Etienne, and they didn't. They significantly failed on that, especially on his long touchdown run. They failed pretty significantly on that. Tennessee had 2 blocked field goal kicks. I apologize. I had to cough there. Yeah, Tennessee had 2 blocked field goal kicks, which having 1 is good for your special teams and for morale on your special teams. Having 2 is quite rare, and that provides a good future for your special teams. Joe Milton had 20 for 34 yards, 20 completions for 34 attempts. Sorry. He had 287 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception. Jalen Wright, the leading rusher, had 16 carries for 63 yards. Brug McCoy had 5 carries for 94 yards and 1 touchdown. the defense for Tennessee had, 1 sack and 7 TFL. So they were getting through the line okay. But they weren't sacking Graham Mertz. Graham Mertz had himself a decent game. He went 19 for 24. He had 166 yards, one passing touchdown, and 1 rushing touchdown. Trevor Etienne had 23 carries for 172 yards. I think I actually call him Montrell Etienne. It's actually Trevor. I apologize. So he had 23 carries, 172 yards, and 1 touchdown. Montrell Johnson Jr. had 12 carries for, I think it's supposed to be, I actually messed up. Sorry. He had 12 carries. He had 1 reception for 18 yards and 1 receiving touchdown, and he had 1 rushing touchdown. I think it was 23 yards actually. Eugene Wilson III had 6 receptions for 44 yards. There wasn't, nobody really stood head and shoulders above for receiving for Florida. For some of the pluses for Florida is their O-line gave Graham Mertz some time to throw the ball when he had to. They also gave huge lanes for Trevor Etienne to run through. The second drive that Florida had was 4 plays for 75 yards for 1 minute and 23 seconds. Even better than Tennessee's first drive. And the defensive line put some good pressure on Milton, forcing 1 interception. My biggest question for Florida is, can they be consistent now? Because we've seen a good game against Tennessee, and we've seen them fall flat on their face against Utah. So is it now time for Florida to get their hands into the dirt and start to play consistently? And if they can do that, they can beat most other teams. Now, are they going to beat Georgia? Probably not. Are they going to beat Michigan? Probably not. But they can at least play well enough to beat 90% of their teams. I think they play FSU later on in the season, so that'll be a fun game to watch. Texas versus Wyoming. This game was a little weird because Texas had some trouble against Wyoming, which is never a good sign when a team that is supposed to when a team that's supposed to be really good has trouble against a team that you're wondering how they're even paying for a football team. That's almost never a good sign. It really isn't. So I'm giving Texas a little bit of a hard time here, but after a win against Alabama, this was definitely a letdown game. But they got through it, so maybe in the future they'll be playing a little better. Wyoming's O-line actually looked really capable, and they seemed to read. And Texas didn't really seem ready for the challenge that O-line provided for them. The wide receiver and running backs for Wyoming also looked pretty stellar. I'll get through their stats in a little bit. Quinn Ewers had a pretty big inaccuracy problem, which probably comes from the fact that he was getting rushed quite a bit. Wyoming was putting a good deal of pressure on him. And it just goes to show that sacking the quarterback is not the only way to affect his game. And I've said it before, but just being in the quarterback's face or being near him, kind of breathing on his neck, does scare quarterbacks, and it doesn't put some worry behind them. So the Wyoming secondary actually, in my opinion, matched up really well against this Texas wide receiving core. And this is a good Texas wide receiving core. This is not like these are not sloths that need to, that, like, they can't run a post route and beat you on it, or they can't do like a double move and beat you. No, these are really good wide receivers that are probably going to be picked in upcoming drafts. So it's not like Wyoming is just. It's not like they're playing, Tulane, or not, I shouldn't even say Tulane. Tulane actually has decent receivers. It's not like they're playing American University's wide receivers on a Texas team. No, this is good. This is really good. There were a lot of missed opportunities, especially for Texas. Inaccurately thrown passes, missed interceptions, things like that. And one player that I really want to highlight in this mistake area is Xavier Worthy, who's a very good receiver. He's very talented, but he has a big problem. He cannot catch the ball. When he does catch the ball, he's very good. When he has the ball in his hands, phenomenal wide receiver. But getting that ball getting that ball to him is a bit tough. I believe like near the beginning of the game, he had 9 dropped passes this season alone. And that's one of the most in college football. So he's going to have to work on this. Texas got really lucky. They had 21 points scored in the fourth quarter, which is what really put them ahead of Wyoming. And they, also with the fact that Texas has a 70% blue chip ratio is pretty, and considering that this Wyoming team does not have anywhere near that is saying something about either the level that these players are playing to, or I don't know what it's saying. This was a real letdown game in my opinion for Texas. And Sarkisian really needs to get his players in order. Quinn Ewers had 11 completions for 23 attempts, 131 yards and 2 touchdowns. Jonathan Brooks was the leading rusher. He had 21 carries for 164 yards. Xavier Worthy had 4 receptions for 56 yards and 1 touchdown. And A.D. Mitchell had 3 receptions for 30 yards. The Texas defense had 1 sack for 5, 1 sack, 5 tackle for losses, and 3 pass defenses, as well as a touchdown. Actually, they had a touchdown as well. Wyoming had Evan Zvadoba, I believe is how you pronounce it, had 17 for 18, 136 yards, and 1 interception. He also had 18 carries, 110 yards, and 1 touchdown. I believe that actually. Let me check, but I can also tell you that Wyatt Wheeland had 8 receptions for 62 yards, and he had 8 receptions for 62 yards. He had a really great game. I thought that he matched up rather well on Texas's secondary. I thought that they kind of looked scared of him, which is not something you always want to see from it's not something you always want to see from your secondary matching up against a wide receiver. I want to go back and say for the rushing, Harrison Whaley was the player that I was just talking about, not Evan. He had 18 carries, 110 yards, and 1 touchdown. So that was again a very good running for Wyoming. And then there's one last game that I really want to talk about, and that's Florida State and Boston College. And this game was back and forth. It was a bit scary for Florida State. And I also want to say that Florida State had really big discipline issues. They had a huge problem with penalties. They had 18 penalties for 131 yards. 18 penalties. I can't stress this enough that penalties kill teams. And this if they hadn't had these penalties, there were times where I was like, Boston College is going to get back into this easily because they keep getting penalties. And Boston College didn't have no penalties. They had 5 penalties for 45 yards. That's not something to write home about either, but it's still not, it's not nearly as bad as 18 penalties for 131 yards. Florida State, I noticed, had a lot of blown coverages that Boston College used spectacularly. They really did. I mean, there was just, they were fitting players into when Florida State was dropping back into zone coverage, Boston College was just fitting players into the spaces between the zones. And it was killing Florida State. It really was. So Mike Norvell's going to have to really get onto that and see what he can do to fix his players. I guarantee you he's like screaming at his players all this week about both about penalties as well as those blown coverages. I do also want to say that I looked at Florida State's penalties in their previous games, and I think one game had like 5 penalties and the other had like 9. I believe that makes Florida State one of the most penalized teams in America in college football at this moment, which is, it's not a trophy that you want. This is not like you're going to go to New York and accept the trophy for the most penalized team in America. You never want that trophy because it is always really, really awful to have that. Florida State's O-line did a really good job though of providing time for Jordan Travis and for Rodney Hill and Trey Benson. They really did a great job with those guys. Florida State also had some trouble containing explosive plays. And Boston College had a few plays that looked like there was miscommunication between the running back and the quarterback. Like the quarterback would go to one side with the ball and the running back would go the other way. And they were never like plays where I think the running back was ever supposed to actually have the ball. I just think that there was some miscommunication about, which side the running back's supposed to go on. Florida State really couldn't get things going on the ground too much. Trey Benson only had 40 yards. I had actually less than 40 yards. So, and then I want to talk about something that actually they talked about on the broadcast when I was watching, and I didn't know it, but I actually really liked. So Boston College's quarterback, Thomas Castellano, they played Holy Cross last week, and Castellanos got a penalty in the Holy Cross game for taunting. And Boston College's coaches gave him a few different options of what he wanted his penalty, what he wanted his punishment to be for getting that taunting penalty, which I like, teach your players, accountability and things like that. I like that a lot. And Castellanos actually made a choice that I admire and I respect him for. And that was that he had to call the athletic director of Holy Cross and personally apologize for the taunting penalty. I love it. I love it because not only does that show that the coach obviously gave him that option and that he wanted him to show accountability and responsibility for his actions, but also shows that Castellanos decided, you know what, I did mess up, and that's not the type of player I wanted to be, which he had said in like social media posts. He posted an apology, I think, and he's like, that's not the type of player I want to be. There are kids, that come to these games that look up to me, and I don't want that to be, my legacy of being that type of player, which I really respect. I do. I like it a lot when teams show great sportsmanship, when players show great sportsmanship, when coaches do the same thing. I love it a lot. I love it more than anybody could ever guess. And I will forever respect a player that is willing to own up for his mistake, to apologize, and things like that. I will forever respect a player like that. So in terms of statistics for Florida State, Jordan Travis had 15 attempts, or 15 completions for 24 attempts, 222 yards, 2 touchdowns, 4 carries for 38 yards, and Rodney Hill had 5 carries for 42 yards. Trey Benson had 12 carries for 38 yards, 1 touchdown, and his longest run was 7 yards. So even though his offensive line did a good job of providing space for him and for Rodney Hill, they didn't have super long carries because they were just getting collapsed on by that Boston College defense. Johnny Wilson was the receiving leader. He had 4 receptions for 105 yards. Jaheim Bell had 5 receptions for 76 yards and 1 touchdown. The team had 3 fumbles, 2 lost, which is not something you really want. And they had 340 total yards. I'm going to get back to that total yardage in a minute after I read Boston College's stats. Thomas Castellanos had 20 completions for 33 yards, 305 yards, for 20 completions for 33 attempts, 305 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, 16 carries, 95 yards, and 1 rushing touchdown. Kyle Robichaud had 21 carries for 64 yards and 1 touchdown. Lewis Bond had 3 receptions for 80 yards, 1 touchdown. The defense had 27 total solo tackles, 1 tackle for loss, 1 pass deflection, and 53 total tackles. They had 13 points in the fourth quarter, which they were trailing behind by a bit from Florida State coming out of the third, and they really brought themselves back into contention for the end of the game with those 13 points. Boston College had a total of 457 yards. That's 117 yards over what Florida State had. Boston College also, I believe, dominated the time of possession. I think it was like 6 minutes more or something like that. So it really is, these things do matter, and Florida State is really lucky that their talent got them out of those 131 yards in penalties, because that was a tough thing for them. So I now want to switch gears and talk about let's talk about Michigan State. Michigan State played Washington, and they did so without their head coach. They did so without Mel Tucker, who I believe it was either last year or the year before. I think it was last year. He signed a new deal for 10 years for $95 million. Well, Michigan State is really regretting that currently, and they are trying to currently get out of that deal because they are trying to fire Mel Tucker for cause. They released it earlier this week because of the scandal that Mel Tucker currently has. He did some inappropriate things on a phone call with they described the person as a vendor. I believe it was actually like a sexual assault speaker. I think was what they were talking about. And lo and behold, Tucker's now facing scandal because he is doing things on a phone call that he shouldn't be doing. Now I'm not going to, postulate on I'm not going to speculate on whether or not it's as bad as it is. That doesn't matter. Okay, it doesn't matter. Mel Tucker has admitted that has happened, but he has said that it was between two consenting adults. She is claiming that it wasn't. Doesn't matter. Whatever. The bad part is that I don't know if Michigan State's going to get out of this $95 million fully guaranteed contract. Mel Tucker is obviously going to try and fight it. He's calling this a miscarriage of justice, that he's being fired not because of this, but because MSU previously knew about this incident, but he's being fired because of other reasons, because of on the field reasons. He's being fired because they don't want the taint of Larry Nassar to get back at them. Because when Larry Nassar was there, people had known that he was doing terrible things to people, to the girls there, and they don't want any of that taint coming back on them again. There was a lot of backlash over it. So he's saying that's what's that's what he's getting fired for. The school is claiming that they're firing because he's not showing that he's being a good steward or a good citizen of society, which I don't know. Whatever the cause, whatever the reason is, they're trying to fire him. So the next thing I actually want to talk about is this seems to be the week, and this really seems to be just the week for scandals, because Baylor is settling a lawsuit with 2016 sexual. Sorry, let me go back to this. They're settling a 2016 lawsuit for sexual assault with 15 survivors. I don't have the number of what the settlement is going to be, but this the president that was there was ousted because of this. He's since passed. And they're reporting that multiple sports had multiple sexual assaults occurred upon them. So it's like, a bunch of players from the football team, some players from the rugby team, from the club rugby team, I believe it is. So they're claiming this. Apparently there's a bunch of evidence that it did happen and that people were covering it up. It's not a good look for Baylor. I'm surprised that Baylor was not trying to, keep this down, keep it quiet a little longer. So, and then next thing, Colorado State obviously had a great game with Colorado, in which Colorado State lost. And there was a play where Henry Blackburn, one of I believe he was either a cornerback or a safety, I can't remember, but he laid a hit on Travis Hunter, an illegal hit. Granted, it was illegal. It sent Travis Hunter to the hospital, took him out of the game. Hunter's going to be missing games in the future. It seems to be a fairly serious injury, but nothing that's going to end his career. Apparently, and now I don't entirely understand this, Henry Blackburn has been receiving death threats from fans of Deion Sanders, from fans of Colorado, other people, because of that hit. Well, Deion Sanders came out and he said he condemns all of this, which, I would expect him to, because, it's a game. This is a game, okay? Do we put a lot of passion? Do we put a lot of our heart? Do we put a lot of our emotions into this game? Of course. It's sports. That is what sports is. Sports is a outlet for those emotions. But you can never let those emotions from the game carry over to doing physical acts upon, another person. You just can't. You just can't do it. And threatening somebody with death because they laid a hit on another football player, it's not a good look. Sanders said, Henry Blackburn is a good player who played a phenomenal game. He made a tremendous hit on Travis on the sidelines. You could call it dirty. You could call it. He said you could call it dirty. You could call it. That might be a typo. I'm not sure. But he was just playing the game of football. But whatever it was, it does not constitute that he should be receiving death threats. This is still a young man trying to make it in life, a guy that's trying to live his dream and hopefully graduate with honors or a degree, committed to excellence and to go to the NFL. He does not deserve a death threat over a game. He's absolutely right. Now, there are some people who don't like Deion Sanders, and I can get some of the criticisms. He's boisterous. He's a bit of a showboater, but in this day and age, that's what football is. Football is entertainment. He is an entertainer. I guarantee you, if you sat down with him, he'd be a pretty nice guy. Deion Sanders is probably a great guy when you sit down with him. I've never sat down with him. I'm probably never going to sit down with him, but I'm sure he's a decent guy, and he's probably not like, he probably doesn't do all the stuff that he does for the media, but he, in this instance, and right here, Deion Sanders, Coach Prime is 1,000% right. Nobody should ever really receive a death threat over a football game. End of story. So on that note, that's going to be it for this game, for this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed. You guys can find this episode, this podcast on Spotify. You can also find it here on YouTube. Please leave a like and a comment down below. If you're listening on Spotify, please leave a review. It really helps me out. It helps out the podcast. Share this with people, because I know this is a small podcast. I don't get the coverage that Fox's podcasts get. But please share this with people, with whoever you can or are willing to. And I really enjoy it. And thanks, and have a great rest of your week. I hope you guys are really excited for this upcoming week of football. It's the start of conference play. It should be a lot of fun. So we'll do an episode on Friday about the teams and games that should be good and should be entertaining to watch. So I hope you guys stick around and watch that episode on Friday. See you guys in the next episode.